Chapter 10. Passion and Patience and the Brave Soldier. Little Christian felt quite sorry to turn away from the picture of the Good Shepherd. I shall never forget it, he thought. The shepherd's face is even more beautiful than my darling mother's. The interpreter took him upstairs into a pleasant room which looked like a nursery. 2 little boys were sitting there, each in his own chair. One of them appeared to be quiet and happy, but the other was crying and seemed very cross and discontented. "These 2 little boys are staying here for a time," said the interpreter. "The one who is crying is called Passion, and his brother's name is Patience." "Why is Passion crying?" asked Christian. "He's a foolish boy," replied the interpreter. "There are some beautiful gifts coming soon from the king, and the children are each to have their share. Patience is willing to wait for them, but Passion is vexed because he cannot enjoy them at once. He wishes to have his pleasure now instead of at the proper time." Just then the door opened, and a man came in carrying a quantity of books and toys and pretty things, which he spread upon the table before Passion. The boy was delighted, and wiping away his tears, began to look at his treasures. Among them were bags filled with bright gold coins, and when Passion saw these, he held them up in his hands and laughed at Patience, who had nothing with which to amuse himself. "Passion is very happy now," said the interpreter, "but in a short time all his coins will be spent, and his pretty things will soon be torn and broken and spoiled, and when the king's gifts come, he will have no share in them. Then he will wish he had waited as Patience is waiting." "Are the king's gifts better than these?" asked the little Christian. "Far better. They are treasures which cannot be spoiled, and Patience is very wise to wait for them." "Passion is laughing now," said Christian, "but I think Patience will have the best of it." "I'm sure he will," replied the interpreter. "You must remember that everything I show you is meant to teach you something, and you will learn from this that it is not wise to wish too eagerly for pleasant things until the king sends them. He knows exactly what is good for each of us, and he will always give us what will really make us happy. If we behave like Passion and try to be happy in our own way, we are sure to be disappointed." The interpreter now took Christian out of the house and through his garden to a place from which they could see a beautiful palace not very far off. The roof of the palace was flat, and upon it a number of people were walking about dressed in garments which shone brightly like gold. "Is that one of the king's palaces?" asked little Christian. "Yes, but it is not easy for anyone to enter." Outside the palace, Christian saw a great crowd of men who looked as if they wished to go in, but were afraid to do so. Then he saw that some other men in armor were standing around the doorway. They had fierce, cruel faces, and the men who were outside dared not try to pass by them. A little way from the door, a man was sitting at a table with a book before him, in which he wrote the name of anyone who tried to get into the palace. Little Christian felt very much interested in all this, and he hoped that one of the men would be brave enough to go into the palace while he was there. "Why does not the king drive away the wicked soldiers?" he said. "He could drive them away, and then all those people could go in." "He could do it quite easy," said the interpreter, "but he wishes to see how many of the people really care about entering the palace. Those who love the king with all their hearts are not afraid of the soldiers. We can wait for a little while, and you will see someone go in." So they sat down upon the grass, and little Christian watched the people. Presently, a man came out from the crowd and went toward the table near the doorway. His name was written in the book, and then he put on his helmet and drew his sword and rushed in among the soldiers. He fought with them for a long time, and Christian thought he would be killed, but although he received many wounds, he got into the palace at last. And then all the people upon the roof began to sing, come in, eternal glory, thou shalt win." Little Christian smiled. "Does that mean we are not to be frightened, because the king will help us and take us safely into his city?" "Yes," said the interpreter. "I thought you would understand it for yourself. Now, you have seen enough for one day. We must find a little bed for you, and tomorrow you will go on your journey." Chapter 11. Little Christian Comes to the Cross. Little Christian slept very comfortably that night, and quite early in the morning he said goodbye to his kind friend. Beyond the interpreter's house, the way of the king was easy to find, for a high wall had been built on each side of the road. Little Christian thought this would make his journey less difficult, but the interpreter told him that the wall did not go all the way to the celestial city. When you have passed it, he said, you must still keep to the straight path, and as long as you do that, you will be safe. Christian had almost forgotten his burden while he was with the interpreter, but as he walked along and the day began to grow hot, he felt its weight again and wished that he could get rid of it. Goodwill said I should lose it at the cross, he thought. I wonder if that is very far away. Presently he came to a place where there was a little hill by the side of the road, and upon the hill he saw the very thing for which he was longing. There stood the cross, and the moment little Christian began to climb the path which led to it, he felt that the bands which fastened his burden were breaking. Then it fell from his shoulders and rolled to the bottom of the hill, and when he turned to see what had become of it, he found that it was quite gone. At first he was so surprised that he could scarcely believe that he had really lost the burden which had been such a trouble to him. I must be dreaming, he thought. But although he stood still for a few minutes and rubbed his eyes, the burden did not come back. The birds went on singing, and the sun shone brightly upon the cross, and he knew that he must be awake, and that the king had really taken the weight from his shoulders forever. Now I can walk as quickly as I like, he said, and he stayed looking at the cross with his heart full of joy and thankfulness. I told you before that the king's own son had once come to visit the country in which little Christian lived, but although he was kind and good to everyone, many of the people hated him, and at last they seized him and put him to death in a very cruel manner by nailing him to a cross of wood. And this cross was now placed by the wayside that pilgrims to the celestial city might see it and remember what had been done for their sake. Little Christian had read of all this in his book, and as he stood near the cross, he thought how very good the king's son must be, and he did not wonder any more why Evangelist and the other strangers loved him so dearly and were never tired of talking about him. Perhaps when they were pilgrims, they carried burdens like mine, he said to himself, and then when they came to the cross, they lost them, just as I have done. But I wish the people had not been so cruel to the king's son. And as he looked up at the cross, the tears came into his eyes. Just then he heard a voice behind him saying, "Peace be to thee." Little Christian turned around quickly and saw 3 persons standing close to him. They wore shining white robes, and when Christian looked at them, his eyes felt dazzled, as if he was gazing at the sun. They must have come from the celestial city, he thought. They're so bright and beautiful. "You have often displeased the king," said one of them, "but I have come to tell you that he's quite forgiven you, and the naughty things which you have done will not be remembered any more." Then the second took him by the hand, saying, "This little suit which you are wearing is torn and soiled. The king wishes his pilgrims to wear clothes which are clean and neat, so I have brought you some new ones." And before little Christian had time to think what answer he should make, his shabby suit was taken off, and he was dressed all in white. Then the third set the king's mark upon his forehead and gave him a little roll of parchment in which, he said, Christian might read as he went along, and he must be sure to take care of it, for he would be asked to show it at the gate of the celestial city. After this, the 3 shining ones went away, and little Christian was left to rejoice over all that the good king had done for him. Chapter 12. Simple, Sloth, and Presumption. You can fancy how very happy little Christian felt as he walked along. "I've lost my burden," he said to himself, "and the king has given me beautiful clothes. I think I would have started on my journey long ago if I had known how pleasant it would be to be a pilgrim." Then he remembered Christiana, and he thought what a pity it was that she had not come with him. But he did not know how she would have managed it, for she had 3 brothers besides her baby sister, and she had to care for all of them. We might have taken turns carrying the baby, he thought, but even then the boys would have been very tired. Perhaps when I get to the city, I might ask the king to send someone to help her with the children, for I should like her to come too. Then he wondered whether his mother had told the king that she had left a little boy behind her in the city of destruction, and whether she would know that his burden had been taken away, and that the king had sent him such beautiful gifts. They are so very beautiful, he thought, as he looked down once more at the clothes in which the Shining One had dressed him. They are as white as snow, and they are not the least bit hot and heavy, as my old ones were. He was walking on with his mind full of these things when he saw, just before him, 3 boys lying on the grass by the side of the road. He stopped to look at them as he passed, and then he found that they were all fast asleep, and that their feet were bound together with bands of iron. The day was very hot, and these boys had foolishly turned out of the path, and had lain down to rest for a little while. The servants of the wicked prince were always on the watch for careless pilgrims, and as soon as the lads were asleep, they had fastened to bind their feet, so that, unless the king himself sent someone to help them, they would never be able to take another step toward the celestial city. Little Christian felt that it would be unkind to leave them lying there, so he went up to them and called to them. "You'd better get up," he said. "This is not at all a safe place to sleep in. Don't you know that someone has bound your feet together?" Then one of them, whose name was Simple, answered, without even opening his eyes, "What is the matter? I don't see anything to hurt. Do let a minute's peace." But little Christian said, "I am sure you are in great danger. Make haste and let me help you undo these irons." The boy who lay next to Simple was named Sloth, and at last he sat up and began to rub his eyes in a very sleepy way. He looked at little Christian, but he would not listen to his advice. "What is the use of disturbing us?" he said. "Just go on. I shall be coming soon, when I have a good rest." And the third boy, who was called Presumption, said, "Surely we can do as we like. If we choose to sleep in a dangerous place, it is our business, not yours. So go on your journey and don't meddle with other people." Then they both lay down again by the side of Simple, and in a few minutes Christian saw that they were all sleeping as soundly as before. It was of no use for him to waste his time over such idle, foolish boys, so he was obliged to turn away, feeling very sorry that they would not listen to him, or believe that they were in the power of the wicked prince.